Okay, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I did do a very quick name change just recently. So if you are here for Blemish on the Whiteboard supporting people of color, your staff of color in predominantly white spaces, you are in the right place. And so I did change it. It is Blemish on the Whiteboard supporting BIPOC staff in predominantly white spaces. And my name is Ellery. I work at Auburn University in University Housing as an area coordinator, where I've also had the pleasure of serving as the Diversity and Inclusion Chair for the past 3 years. And I'm also working with multiple screens. So if it looks like I'm looking all over the place, that's pretty much what's going on. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so we've all been working virtually now for almost a year. I don't know if you all are anything like me, but it is surprising that we've made this whole year. This is crazy. But working virtually, if you're like me, you probably have 15 tabs open in your head and probably 15 other tabs open on your screen. And so I always find that it's really important before we do this work to just ground into where we are. So if you have the capability to just put your feet flat, maybe sit up straight if possible, or to the best of your ability, close your eyes and find a neutral site and just relax and breathe. We're going to take about 20 seconds to just ground into the space that we're in. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right. Secretly, that also gives me a chance to kind of relax because sometimes I get a little nervous. Now, talking about diversity and inclusion, equity, social justice, any of these things can sometimes be difficult to handle and difficult to do. And so we always want to have some ground rules going into it. So we just have like these rules of engagement, right, when we're having these conversations. So the first thing is that I would love for us all to agree to make this a brave space. Stay engaged, lean in and expect some discomfort, and speak truthfully. Tell your story if you are comfortable to do so. Share with the group in a manner that you are capable of doing so. But when we all do that and we all work together, the space becomes a brave one and one that we all can learn. Next, I ask that you make I statements and not you statements. Speak from a personal place, right? Like truthful, and that only helps when we talk from our own personal space. Like I said, we're going to be talking about BIPOC staff, but I am someone who identifies as Black, so I'll probably interchange in that just because I want to speak from my personal experience and the things that I've experienced as a Black person and a Black woman. And so just make sure that you're making I statements and not you statements if you share out. The next thing is to remember that not knowing can hurt, questions do not. I'm sure we all grew up hearing there's no such thing as a stupid question. And that's true, especially if it's genuine and you're trying to learn something. So if you're going to ask questions, feel free to do so because that gives you an opportunity to learn. That gives somebody in the space opportunity to learn. And then what you learn, you can take with you. And then make sure that if you do ask a question that you're listening to understand and comprehend and not necessarily to respond. Next up, I ask that what's said here stays here and what's learned here leaves. A lot of times in anytime you're doing DEI type of work, people are sharing their personal experiences. That doesn't mean that you might not learn from the things that they discuss. So make sure that you leave those stories and experiences here. But if you learn something, be sure to take that with you. And lastly, you are here. I believe that you all clicked on this session for a reason and for a purpose. And so you're here. So I ask that you just be present in the space. People are going to share from personal experiences. People are going to share how they might be feeling or how they're impacted by the information here. And so we want you to be present so that way you can learn, you can engage, and we can all just feel welcomed in the space. So now we're really going to get into my presentation, and it's going to kick off with a video. So it's 2006. Can everybody hear? He's running for U.S. Senate. He's really, I desperately need some national press. Do you have any ideas? So what I did, I called a friend who was in at one of the most successful media
receptionist and we say, we're here for the lunch. She motions for us to follow her. We walk through corridors, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a staff room. At which point she looks at us and she says, where are your uniforms? Just as this happens, my friend rushes in. The blood drains from her face. There are literally no words, right? And I look at her and I say, don't you think we need more than one Black person in USA?
Okay, was everybody able to hear that, or do I need to play that back? Play again? Okay. Could you all hear it, or do we want to just keep the captions on? Okay, so let's try again. I apologize about that too.
So it's 2006. My friend Harold Ford calls me. He's running for U.S. Senate in Tennessee. He says, Melody, I desperately need some national press. Do you have any ideas? So I have an idea. I called a friend who's in New York and a most successful media company. And she said, why don't we host an editorial board launch for the world? You come with me. Harold and I are at New York. We are in our best suits. We look like Charlie and Parties. And we get to the receptionist and we say, where are the lunch? She motions for us to follow her. We walk through a series of corridors, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a staff room. At which point she looks at us and she says, where are you? Just as this happens, my friend rushes in. The blood drains from her face. There are literally no words, right? Don't you think we need more than one Black person in the USA?
Okay, so I apologize for the audio and what's going on with the video. So we're going to discuss the video, and I can go ahead and just kind of walk you through what happened in the video. And so that was Melody. She is a CEO of a financial company, and she was saying that her and a friend, Harold, who was running for the U.S. Senate, they were putting together something for him to have some press. They arrived there in their shiny, beautiful new suits, and they said, we're here for the luncheon. Someone from the hotel that they were at took them through a series of rooms and took them to the back and then asked, where are your uniforms? And then her friend came in and was pretty much just upset about what was happening. And she turned to her and said, now, don't you think we need more than one Black person in the U.S. Senate? So this is what the video said, and I do apologize that the audio wasn't working. And a part of that conversation that I wanted to have following the video was, can anybody tell me what the offense was that happened based on the story that she told? And if you're free to share your audio, please do so. Hey, Abby.
Hey, Ellery. I interpreted the offense to be that they had shown up for this, high-profile event, and because of their ethnicity and the color of their skin, they were perceived to be part of the staff, the help staff, rather than invitees of the event.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it. Anybody else want to share? I see some comments in here. Based on, Brittany, you said based on what you could gather, maybe stereotyping that Black people are the help. And that is correct. Abby, both you and Brittany are correct. This often happens when you don't always see Black people in specific spaces or in specific positions. And then also if you only see them in specific positions and places. And so here it is, a woman who is a CEO of a company, and here it is, a man running for U.S. Senate, which we know is not an easy task, and they're still being seen as the help. And so this is why I decided that it was really important to discuss how you could support BIPOC staff in predominantly white spaces. So let's continue the conversation. What is support? And why does it matter, especially in the workplace? Again, if you are comfortable sharing your audio, feel free to do so. If not, I can always read it from the chat. Okay, well, it's okay if nobody wants to share. Charlotte, I see that support allows people to grow. Thank you. And that's correct. You know, support is a way in which you give people assistance. It's something that that can hold something up, right? And so when we think about work and we think about our staff, it's how are we assisting them? How are we helping them be successful in their position and in the roles that they have? How are we helping them grow professionally and get prepared for the next position? Which then brings me to, what does BIPOC mean, right? So BIPOC is pretty much a new term, and it stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And to me, it's a new term, but it's a way that we're kind of moving away from saying things like minority and marginalized, and or referring to people who are non-white. And support for them specifically, why do we feel that support for our BIPOC staff in predominantly white spaces matters? So I would say that support for BIPOC staff matters because if you are in a space that was maybe originally designed or is still designed to not necessarily include you or make you feel included as a person, you might end up distancing yourself. You may feel drained and frustrated. So supporting BIPOC staff is a form of activism. So I would say if you consider yourself an ally, if you consider yourself trying to be a part of that culture change, know that if you're supporting your BIPOC staff in areas in which they're not normally included holistically as a person, this is a form of anti-racism, it's a form of anti-oppression, and it's a form of anti-discrimination. And it's a way you can bring activism into your everyday work. I know a lot of times we might see activism on TV and we say, you know, I want to be a part of this. I want to do this, but you might not know where to start or what to do. If you find yourself in a predominantly white space and you see that you only have a few people who might identify as BIPOC, this is a great opportunity to do so right in the everyday work that you do and that you perform. And then I do see some things here in the chat. I see because whiteness is normalized in most of these spaces, and it often alienates BIPOC groups. This is correct. And I see that predominantly white spaces can intentionally and unintentionally reproduce oppressive racist environments. Again, absolutely correct. When you are supporting your BIPOC staff, you are performing activism and you are going against that anti-oppressive environment, and you're showing them that they matter and it is important for them to be there. So I appreciate you all sharing out. Thank you, Chris and Courtney. So from my personal experiences and then from talking to my BIPOC students and other colleagues and co-workers from other institutions, these are some of the concerns that BIPOC staff are often feeling and dealing with. So what we normally see is that we might feel undervalued in the workplace. BIPOC staff are often addressed as someone or something below their position, and they often feel invisible. This is what Melody was talking about. Again, here is a CEO. I'm in a position where I can't even imagine being a CEO. And then somebody referring to me as the help. And not only that, but then you reprimanded me at the same time. For me personally, this has happened to me. Working in university housing, I'm often addressed or talked to as if I'm a student, which is a completely different conversation that needs to be had as well. And then I've also been referred to as the help or in a custodial position myself. Oftentimes we feel invisible. What am I doing in my role if I don't feel like I'm included? Another thing that happens is that lack of representation. BIPOC staff often are the only in their department. I have been working in university housing now for 3 years, and in the time that I have been here, We have rehired for a coworker, somebody in my unit, 6 times, and we have hired 2 Black males in that time period, but I have still only been a woman of color or a Black woman since I've been here. Campus climate also plays an effect. BIPOC staff might feel fear of retaliation for maybe personal or social and political views. For example, I'm wearing a shirt today that has a lot of names of women who have been killed, especially by law enforcement specifically. Sometimes I feel fear in wearing this shirt, and I might wear it only in my office or when I'm not going to be around a lot of people. I've also been told to take down a picture of Colin Kaepernick in my office because of how somebody might feel about that. And for me, this was something that I thought I needed to do because of the space and the students that I normally interact with. Another thing that might happen is unspoken expectations and extra involvement. BIPOC staff often do extra work. This might include late night meetings, advisement or mentoring for students, and or DEI work. Again, I have been here for 3 years. I've also been the chair of diversity and inclusion for 3 years. And prior to this, I didn't have any experience in this work. Additionally, this week alone, I've had 3 meetings with 3 women who are looking to join an NPHC organization, which is normally serving normally serving to Black students. So just kind of giving you all some background in my personal story as well of some of the things that tend to happen to your BIPOC staff in predominantly white spaces. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? All right, so I shared all of this with you, right? We understand these are the things that BIPOC staff are feeling and experiencing. So how do we create that inclusive environment for them? 2 great things that you could do is start with your practices and your development. Intentional training for supervisors and student staff. Intentional means to be done on purpose. Trainings that encourage inclusion and equity efforts should be done on purpose for the purpose of making BIPOC staff feel included and supported. Remember, these things start at the top. And so if we are seeing our leadership and our supervision get engaged, then it's going to come all the way down to those that they are supervising and the students that they're probably supervising as well. Another great thing to do is develop and implement identity-based trainings and effort. Identity-based trainings are also promote inclusion and support your BIPOC staff because it shows that you want to learn about them holistically. You want to know about their experiences. You want to know about their culture. It's okay, like we said earlier, it's okay to ask those questions. But again, this is showing like I support you as a person, but not only that, but when training is put into it, that means the whole department, the whole organization is putting work into learning about somebody else's culture and experience. Acknowledge your own biases, power, and privilege. All of us have power, privilege, and biases depending on the spaces that we walk into. A great example of that was here it is, we have a virtual conference and I didn't even think about would my computer work? Is my Wi-Fi going to work? Can I even access this? That's a privilege for me. And so when you identify that and you understand that you do have power and privileges in certain spaces, that you can realize how you're showing up in the space. Are you hurting or hindering somebody in the space based on the power and the biases and the privilege that you carry? And this is really important in predominantly white spaces because when you're learning and acknowledging your biases, power, and privilege, it can reveal to you, am I a part of the problem or am I a part of genuinely making a change? And then also it's so important to create a safe space. It's one thing to say we have a safe space, we are a safe space, but you have to create it. So sometimes that means you have to be the person who starts the conversation. So for example, we saw a lot of things that happened this past summer between Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and a lot of the protests that we had. Were you waiting for your BIPOC staff to have that conversation with you and say, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I need a break, I need a mental day? Or did you go to them and say, hey, I know there's a lot that's going on that's probably impacting you personally, and I want you to know that you have that space with me. Or, hey, let's talk. And you could probably just visually see that load come off of them, but that's you creating the space versus making me assume that the space is there, not knowing if it really is or not. Two other things that you could focus on is communication and relations. So encourage mutual support. You might not have all the answers or know exactly how to support your BIPOC staff, and that's okay. One thing that I always appreciated from my supervisor was her saying, I am a white woman and I don't know how to support you in this specific situation. That was honest and it was real. But she was able to encourage me to speak to somebody else that she thought might be good for me. But it also gave me the option. It's not a forced situation. It's not a forced relationship. But she knew that it could be support that I could use and that I could benefit from. This also goes into mentorship. Studies have shown that Black students benefit more and they are actually more successful in higher ed when it comes to having a mentor, especially if the mentor is an advisor or a staff member. The same goes for your BIPOC staff. So having somebody who might be in a higher position than them or might even be parallel to them at a different institution can help mentor them and get them to where they want to go and to be successful in their roles. But it doesn't always have to be a person of color. If you feel like you could be a great mentor to a BIPOC staff member in a predominantly white space, they can still benefit from you, which also comes down to using your power of influence. Again, if you find that you are a part of the majority in the space, that means you have power. So how you use it can also show how you support your staff. If you're in a meeting and you find that maybe Ellery constantly being cut off. Maybe Ellery's not engaged as much. This is a great way for you could stop and say in the meeting, hey, I think Ellery was saying something. Let's go back to what she was saying. I think we need to finish listening to her. Or maybe have a side conversation with me and say, why aren't you always engaged? How come, you don't say much in meetings? And this could be an opportunity for me to tell you, I feel like I'm always cut off. I feel like when I do say something, nobody's listening to me. I feel like when I do engage, people, they might tone police me, because we do know that a lot of our communication is nonverbal. So this is a way for you to support them by using your power that you have in the space. Another great thing is something that I personally have a love-hate relationship with is evaluations and assessment, but specifically of your leadership and supervision. This is really important as it comes to your BIPOC staff, because as we said before, they might feel invisible or overlooked. So this is a great way for you to specifically have questions and conversations with them as to how you can make them feel included in the space and how you can make sure that they're feeling included at work. And not even just at work, but holistically as a person. Are they distant? Are they engaged in any type of way or not? And this, again, like I said, starts with your leadership. So this is just a great way for you to kind of see where you are, benchmark, and decide how can we grow from here. And then, like I said earlier, now that you've created that safe space, make sure that you continue to provide it. It's sometimes very daunting for me as a Black woman to always have to bring certain conversations to the table and to have to say, this is something that we need to do. This is something that I feel is important. So if you're going to create the space, be sure to provide it as well. And then lastly, two really important things that you could do is focus on your recruitment and your retention. Increase representation. We have learned through Black Panther and President Obama and now Vice President Harris and all the other firsts that representation matters. It shows that as a Black woman, I can be in a certain position that I may not have ever thought that I could be in before. And so when you increase that representation, it also increases your retention. If you are at a predominantly white institution, or if your institution is just more white serving, then what does your communication look like? If I go to your website, what does that look like? If you say we are inclusive, we are diverse, but I come to it and your entire staff, like for us, our entire RA staff is white, Are you really inclusive? Are you really standing on that principle of being inclusive and diverse? And then understanding that diversity and inclusion are two completely different things. And so increasing that representation and making it visible is another way in showing that you support BIPOC staff. Intentional hiring processes is so important now because it can honestly drive people towards wanting to work at your institution or drive them away. So again, being intentional means on purpose. Seek out BIPOC staff. So utilize any BIPOC that you might know at your institution currently. Ask them, can you make sure that this is getting out? People of color, Black people, however you feel like this communication can get to them, this is what we're looking for. Be intentional about the hiring boards that you're using. Are we only using one that maybe someone of BIPOC doesn't have access to, or maybe what do those numbers look like? Do BIPOC people even use this board? So look for different ways in which you can get your message out there and get your application out there. Another way for you to work on intentional hiring processes is look at your actual application. There are specific words that attract men to applications, and they might also deter a woman from actually applying. The same goes for BIPOC. I had the experience of working at a small HBCU, and for me, it was actually very intimidating to apply to Auburn because my background was always in smaller institutions. And so certain words can make you not feel like you should apply or that you would even have a really good opportunity. So looking at the language that you're using in your application is another way that you can support and recruit BIPOC staff people. Another thing with that is, what does our description say? Most of us have positions that might be able to be described in just a few bullets. Once you go about maybe 6 or so bullets, past maybe 6 or so bullets, some biases start to come out in that. It might not look like it, but if you kind of pay attention to it, if you say things like, we're looking for a team player, that's a bias. Yes, we all want a team player, and yes, we're all hoping everybody's a team player. But if I don't consider myself a team player, or if I consider myself who just works well by myself, that might not make me want to apply for the job. Just trying to give an example of what that could look like. So just look at your applications, look at your descriptions, and see if you're able to recruit BIPOC, the BIPOC group. Another thing is upward mobility. Are there people in higher positions that are of color? Do you see that in your current institution? And if you don't, how can we make sure that we are getting people of color in higher positions? And then when there are positions that are open at your institution that are higher up, are you encouraging your BIPOC staff to apply for these jobs? This is how we encourage upward mobility, and we see them and we let them know, hey, I see you in this role. I think that you would be great in this role. Are you working with them, looking over their resumes, looking over their cover letters, preparing them for interviews? This is how you encourage them to step up and to take on higher ranking positions. And then a great thing to do, if you're somebody who works specifically with students like I do, a great thing to do is partner with your student organization. An example that I always give of this is that working in university housing, we currently have 3 buildings that are specific to our Panhellenic sororities, which are normally seen with white women, versus NPHC, which you would normally see Black women be a part of. In their halls, they have their halls are normally decorated. They have a nice decorated study space. They have very nice chapter rooms. But our NPHC sororities do not have the same thing. So when we partnered with them, we created that. We wanted to give them a space in which they could have their chapter meetings, in which they can practice and rehearse for their shows that they're having, where they could meet up maybe just to hang out and engage. And this was our way of partnering with student organizations, which actually helped us recruit more BIPOC students for our RA position. This also helped them recruit from our RAs, as well as it gave us an opportunity to work with them. We've sponsored events with them as well as other minority serving organizations. And this is just increasing that retention and that recruitment. So now we have students who want to join and be a part of housing, and we're able to keep them on because they're also seeing the work and the effort. They're also meeting other women. They're also engaging with other women in a way that they may not have had access to before. So partnering with your student organizations, especially if they are minority serving, is also a really great way to support your BIPOC staff. Now, I know I said a whole lot and gave you all a lot of information. And a lot of times people might say, we need to have these critical conversations, but we don't know how we could have those conversations or what that looks like. What tools do we need to get there? So I wanted to provide you all a toolkit so that you can get started. The first tool in my kit is to remember that inclusion is a verb and it requires action. It means absolutely nothing if we're just talking about inclusion, if we're just talking about diversity, equity, or social justice. We have to put our mouths where our feet are, and we have to move. And so always remember that inclusion is a verb, it requires action. And truthfully, you're not doing anything if you're not getting started. The next tool in my kit is to tell you to start with yourself. So this requires you to be prepared. A lot of times these conversations are hard to have. It's difficult or difficult to hear. It's difficult to find out if you're maybe a part of the problem, right? And so you have to prepare yourself. What would this conversation look like with your BIPOC staff? What would these feelings or emotions be like for you when you're engaging in this with your BIPOC staff? So try to mentally and emotionally prepare yourself for the conversation, because if you don't, you could end up harming others more than you're actually helping. A next great thing to do is to learn to listen. And what also goes along with this is your tone and your approach. How are you approaching this conversation? How are you approaching a certain subject or even approaching a certain training, right? This can show me that you actually support what I'm doing versus not. What is your tone when you're there? Do you seem like you're just not interested? Do you seem like you're defensive? Again, this might cause me to shut down when I'm trying to engage with you and make me feel like you're not listening to the things that I'm saying. Following your conversations with them, I encourage you to reflect and then take action. We've already said that inclusion is a verb, right? So it means action. So set and monitor obtainable goals for yourself. This is what I'm going to do over the next 6 months. SMART goals, we learn about those all the time. So I'm going to attend so many trainings. I'm going to have so many conversations. I'm going to personally sit down with somebody from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Whatever those goals look like for you, set them and monitor yourself and make sure that you're maintaining and keeping up with them. Another great thing you can do is normalize conversations on social justice, race, equity, and diverse topics. This takes the awkwardness out of meetings and conversations that we're having because now we're normalizing them. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has had an experience, and you have the right to share that, and you have the right to have that experience. But if we don't normalize these conversations, it's only going to continue to be awkward, and then it's only going to continue to be swept under the rug until the next big incident happens or occurs. So just make sure that you're normalizing these conversations and what these things could look like in your workspace. And then another great thing that you can do for yourself also is to provide resources. A majority of the time, predominantly white institutions are located in predominantly white communities as well. I can tell you for myself, there aren't a lot of things that serve me personally as a Black woman in my immediate area. I have to travel out a little bit further, which is okay. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but it does mean that there's a little extra work for me. So when you provide these resources for your BIPOC staff, again, this is another way of showing that you care about them holistically and not just as an employee, but also this is work for you. If you have a BIPOC staff member that's looking for a specific salon or barbershop, and you're finding out that they're maybe 5 places that you feel comfortable going to, but there's only one, that's going to start revving up some things inside of you. That's going to start getting you, opening your eyes to seeing what your BIPOC staff might be struggling with outside of work. And if they're struggling with that outside of work, it's a good chance that it's something going on inside of the job as well. And so this is a great tool for you, and it's also showing how you support and care for them. And then my next tool for you is lead with others. Once you've done that self-work, once you've had these conversations, it's now time to lead out with other people in your department or your organization. So this, again, that love-hate relationship comes down with assessments, surveys, and interviews. Start having assessment so you can take inventory of where you all stand as an organization or a department. This helps you provide a check of your department's climate and culture. So you can ask specific questions. Are we hindering our BIPOC staff mentally, their well-being, their impact, or are we helping provide access and success for them? Are we inclusive? Are we equitable? Or are we aiding in the culture and climate, or are we changing it? And are we checking off a box when it comes to diversity and inclusion work, or are we truly being authentic in the work that we're doing? This is a great way for you to get those answers, especially honest answers. And then if some people aren't completely open to sharing, you can always do it anonymously. Another thing from there is start to articulate your vision, expectations, and your standards. So now that we've done all of this work, it's time to put things together and make sure that try to get everybody on board. Do expect some type of discomfort or pushback, but the point is that the vision and the expectations are now out there and it's articulated for the entire department to do the work. And this is also a great place for you to be able to put together your strategic plan and what it's going to look like over the next coming months to the next 1 to 5 years. Then be a role model. We've all heard this saying, be the change you want to see. And so that means it has to start with you. So that means practicing the things that you're preaching and just role modeling that behavior. And then from there, like I said earlier, you might receive some type of pushback. You might receive, there's going to be some discomfort. People might not want to get engaged, but it's time to reinforce what your vision, expectations, and standards are. So lean into that discomfort. Be ready to confront specific behaviors and things that are going on that are hindering your BIPOC staff and just hindering a cultural change in general. And don't be afraid to discourage anyone from being discriminatory or trying to continue in an oppressive environment. So once you start reinforcing those behaviors, you'll really start to see a shift in people. Sometimes it's going to be positive, sometimes it's going to be negative, but the point is that now we're starting to see a change that we want to see. And now we're going to really start supporting our BIPOC staff, especially when they're the only or if there's only a few. So I know I said a lot of stuff and I'm always told that I speak very fast. So I tried to slow down, you all. But based on where we are there any questions about anything or anything that anybody would like to discuss? I can read things from the chat as well as feel free to turn on your camera if you have the possibility to do so and your audio and share out with everyone. Thank you, Abby. And I'll wait to see if anybody has any questions. All right. Okay, I see Chris jumping in here. Let me add you.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
All right. I appreciate your comment earlier about Colin Kaepernick in terms of being asked to take that down. I think that's something that I've grappled with as, you know, after George Floyd happened, people got more comfortable with sort of the rhetoric of supporting Black lives.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little jaded, to be honest with you. And so that is something that I certainly have tried to grapple with as a person of color, and that my colleagues are now much more open to have those conversations But sometimes I ask myself, is it too late?
Yeah, yeah. And that, I think that's a great question. I can say just from my own personal experience that there are times when I feel like that as well, especially from doing this diversity inclusion work now for 3 years. There are times when I feel like it's not like the students are getting it, but the people I work with are not. And it often does make you feel like, am I wasting my time? Is it too late for you to have these conversations? But I would encourage you to share that exact thing. The fact that you feel like it's too late. And I don't know exactly how to get past that. I don't know exactly how to tell you all what to do in this moment, but I want you to know that this is how I am feeling now when we're talking about it and how you want me to be engaged with it. Because oftentimes what happens is that people of the BIPOC community often have to be the educators as well. And that's also just as draining. So I do appreciate you sharing your experience. I don't know if you were necessarily asking me a question, but
I just wanted to understand. And I'm an Auburn alum, and so I'm glad that they're able to provide some spaces for like NPAC students, as you know, we certainly didn't have that when I was undergrad. So.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you for sharing that with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I do see some questions in the chat as well. Abby asks, how can we incorporate this into the ongoing student affairs diversity action plan development? Abby, I don't know. I am more than welcome to share the things that I have and the things that I have experienced. And I think a great way to start with that, again, is maybe having some very specific assessments and surveys and interviews with our staff of color, our students of color, and try to put in some type of changes from there. I hope that was helpful. But of course, you know, you and I can always talk more too. Then I also see, are there any resources for reducing the invisible load on BIPOC staff? I don't know any specific resources that I could tell you, but I would definitely say that from my personal experience, something that you could do is really working with your student organizations that are more minority serving. This is what my experience has been. I have a lot of students who are looking to join NPHC organizations. So they come and talk to me about it, like getting prepared for their meetings, getting prepared to turn in their packets, just kind of the anxiety that's surrounding it. And I often have to meet with them to discuss it. Also being a member of an NPHC organization as well. So when we partner with them and we're preparing for what they have going on, that can take the load off of me. So I'm not the only one that's doing that work with them. Another great thing to do is we recently implemented affinity spaces into our RA training, and we also do it with our GACs. That helped take a lot of load off of myself, as well as some of my GACs that have other identities that are not always at the forefront. So that took pressure off of me of always meeting with my Black students or having conversations with my Black students. And that gave them a space to talk and engage with each other and share experiences with each other and things that they didn't even know that somebody else may have been dealing with that they were dealing with as well. And so with us having, I do have, I would say we have a pretty diverse GAC staff, and a lot of them took the challenge of doing that work. And so it helped having them in that position. So that way it wasn't just me always having to have those conversations. So that could be two ways that I would say that you can engage, kind of take that invisible load off your BIPOC staff, and then always just having a conversation with them, like, what does this look like? What is the invisible load of things that you are carrying, and how can I take that responsibility off of you? Thank you, Catherine, for asking that question. Jennifer, okay. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. War Eagle, yes, other increase. It is often a burden to be the educators on BIPOC communities when our experiences are not all the same. This is very true. which actually I thank you for that, because that's going to lead me into my last slide. And I just wanted to give you all some key things to remember if you don't take anything else away from my presentation, which is one, please believe us. And this is all of us in the BIPOC community. Our stories are real and our experiences are real. Believing us will always be a step in how you support us. And just like Brittany said, sometimes we are the educators in this, but that's a very heavy load to carry when you're also dealing with it. You know, again, as we talked about the things that we saw this summer, for me, it was actually very unfair to have to re-traumatize myself seeing George Floyd being killed, re-traumatize myself talking about Breonna Taylor sleeping in her home being killed, something that I do every single day, right? And then have to come to work and educate everybody on the subject, educate everybody about why this is important, why Black Lives Matter, why we are seeing these protests erupt in all of these cities, right? That is exhausting. So when we share our stories with you, please believe us, and then also give us the opportunity to not always be the educators. Another great thing to do is remember that everything is not about race, but when it's not acknowledged, it can feel like it. Oftentimes when we have group meetings, or for example, we're in interviews, I'm always assigned to read last. Now, I don't necessarily believe that this is because I'm Black, but if it's something that's constantly happening and all my coworkers are white and they're always going ahead of me or assigned ahead of me, it can truly feel like that. So make sure that you're acknowledging the space that you're in, the power and privilege that you hold, and what you are maybe doing when it comes to your BIPOC staff. We understand that everything is not about race, but we also understand that racism is systematic and it's ingrained in our institutions. So although it might not be overtly, and although you might not consider yourself racist, that does not mean that it's not something that's happening in the system or the situation. Remember that BIPOC is diverse and varies amongst people. BIPOC is an umbrella term, and if not used correctly, it can overlook the major differences within these groups. Again, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. I am a Black woman. I am not a BIPOC woman. So just make sure that you understand that it is diverse and varies amongst us, and so do our stories and experiences. Don't assume and don't exclude. Don't assume I want to do something because it might be minority serving or Black serving, or because you think I just want to do it. But don't don't exclude me from something just because I am Black, or because you're not used to seeing minorities doing that same thing. A stereotype amongst Black people is that we don't swim. We don't know how to swim. Don't not invite me to the lake because that's a stereotype. I might really like going to the lake. So don't, exclude us from things, but also don't assume that I want to go to the step show because I'm Black and because I'm a member of NPHC. Personally, I am sick of step shows. Don't be awkward having these conversations or when you're engaging or coming into these spaces. The best thing for you to do is just be yourself. Ask, but don't invade. Use, but don't abuse. One big thing about me is my hair. I always use that as my cultural identifier. And so I'm sure we're all aware of, please do not touch me. Do not touch my hair. I'm not a pet. If you have questions about me and my hair, trust me, I am more than available to share and answer the questions. So please just ask me, but don't invade my space. And use me, but don't abuse me. Yes, I have always had a passion for diversity work, but I didn't have that before I had the experience here. So don't just abuse me because I might have had background working with minority students or because I come from a small school. Ask me if this is stuff that I want to do. Use me because I do have the experience, but don't abuse me. Pause before contributing, but don't remain silent. Silence can be crippling. Silence can also be harmful. So if you feel something in the space, speak up, say it. As long as you're being genuine and you are actually asking to understand and to learn, you won't be hurting anyone in the space. But sometimes your silence can be just as damaging. Make sure that you lean into your discomfort or excuse yourself. If anybody is a fan of This Is Us, then you should know that this first season, they had a great part with Randall and Kate and how he was expressing everything that he was feeling and how he felt growing up in a white family. And she began to get upset, not knowing or understanding his experience. And for him, he stopped and he said, this is why I can't talk to you, because you get upset and now I want to comfort you. But what happens to my feelings? This often happens to BIPOC staff in predominantly white spaces, because it's a challenging thing to hear if you are learning that you might be aiding in the process, right? And so if you are finding yourself so uncomfortable and you're getting overtly emotional, please excuse yourself so that the attention can continue to be on your BIPOC stories and experiences. And lastly, it's okay to start small as long as you start. And I want to thank, I am a part of our diversity and inclusion committee as well for student affairs. And this is where I got this from. And this is probably the biggest thing I would love for you all to remember. We always want to get caught up in either doing way too much in the beginning, or we do so little that we might as well not do anything at all. The important thing to do is prioritize what you can do, prioritize what's in front of you, what you think is going to truly start to make a change, and start there. The most important thing is it doesn't matter how small the start is, as long as you do. And that is the conclusion to my presentation. And I thank you all for being with me today. It looks like we have a few more minutes. Does anybody have any questions for me? April, I see one in the chat. It says, what do you do when people on your staff want to join DEI committees almost as a resume builder, but refuse to address DEI issues in office or host any cultural events? I would definitely say, April, in that instance, is when we start to, when we think about assessment, we think about reinforcing that behavior. If we are going to say that we are going to have an inclusive environment, if we're going to say we're going to focus on cultural events and programs, then you should model that behavior and then reinforce it. I think your committee, if you're a part of the committee, start to have something small. What we did when I first took over the committee is that I focused on Awareness Month. So Black History Month, I started small. I was like, okay, within the department, we're going to do a little trivia. We might do door decorations. And then I also did the same for Women's History Month. I did the same just for other months and other things that were coming up. So we can kind of get the idea going of cultural awareness, as well as we started a email blast that went out weekly of just different cultural things, different experiences. Like we focused on the whole identity wheel. So we're talking about sexual orientation, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about economic status, all of these things. And so that was kind of the first push that we made as far as trying to have these things. And then from there, I would say start reinforcing it. I would hope that you have a supervisor or somebody that does support you in this position to reinforce the behavior. Hey, you say that you want to be a part of DEI, then you have to do the DEI work. That could also look like doing a personal assessments, having personal surveys and interviews, and just really start kind of fact checking people. Like, I know you say that you want to do this, but you don't really seem invested in it. So how can I get you invested in it? And how can I make sure that you're truly doing this work? And if you're not going to do it, you need to excuse yourself from it because you're causing more harm. What I've noticed for me is that for a while I was tiptoeing around it. I think for me as a Black woman, that kind of played into the fear of retaliation. But we are definitely at a point now in our department where we are truly reinforcing the behavior and pushing that change that we want to see, because we can't just keep talking about it and we can't just depend on trainings here and there. We have to truly do the work. I hope that answered your question. Does anybody else have any questions for me? Okay. If not, it looks like we are pretty much to the end, because I know you have about the next sessions open up at about 5 minutes to it. If you have any questions for me, this is my email. Feel free to reach out to me, or if you just want to talk or share your experiences or anything like that, I am completely open to it. I am not a complete professional, but I am newly certified in diversity and inclusion. And so I do love this work and I do love what I do and I love speaking with other people. So I truly hope you all learned something today and I truly thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, April, for your question. It was a little tough, but I appreciate it. I hope I answered it correctly.